Happy Friday, Moz fans. Today I want to talk about a concept that I think is going to be important for SEOs going forwards actually. And that concept is the difference between in and out of model responses. So this is about LLM responses, but it also very much applies to these sort of hybrid experiences that we see in Google search right now, such as AI mode, AI overviews, web guides. If you don't know what web guides are, I'll link a resource on that below, but I think that's going to be important as well. Anyway, back on topic. In-model and out-model responses. So there's basically two things that can happen when you, oversimplifying, two things that can happen when you make a LLM prompt. One of the first things the model is going to do is decide whether it needs to do any grounding searches. So that means, does it need to make any external queries, which normally means Google searches. Even with ChatGPT, it normally means Google searches at the moment, to decide whether it needs any fresh information or whether it needs to check anything that it's not sure of. So if it doesn't, then for example, we might have a query like write me a poem that doesn't refer to anything particularly factual or fresh or topical. So you would probably just get a response straight out of the LLM without it making any of these external grounding searches, and then you get a response. So if you wanted to influence this response, the only thing you could do really would be to influence the underlying training data of the model. So to give you some context, GPT-4 finished training in, I think, late 2022, and GPT 4.5 finished training in late, I think maybe August 2024. So this is quite long time spans between model refreshes, and a lot of people are still using models which at this point are coming up to 4 years old or even more. So your frame to sort of quickly influence this is non-existent, and in the long term, you're basically trying to influence any of the content which goes into the training data for these models, which at this point is basically any written content whatsoever that ends up being ingested by a computer. It's incredibly broad, and that obviously doesn't just mean your own site. That could mean external sites, but it can also at this point mean things like books. It's gotten incredibly broad with this underlying training data. I think what's more interesting for SEOs is out-of-model responses. So this is when the LLM or the tool you're using decides it is going to make some external searches. So an example query would be, what happened in the December 2025 core update? And so I tried this query in a few different tools, and in ChatGPT, I'll share a link to this below, but in ChatGPT, you can actually at the moment see in DevTools in your browser what the grounding searches are. And with some of these Google experiences, you can see what we assume are representative in terms of what it's doing with the query fanouts as well. So we have a rough idea what some of these searches might be that are being made. And it'll be things like, in this case, did it exist? So the first thing would be confirming that there actually was a December 2025 core update, and I'm not just making it up. Then what was the timeline? Then who was impacted? Then what the themes might be. And it's obviously going to find various articles ranking in Google search for these kind of queries. And often these will be not the kind of queries that a human might type in, shall we say. They'll be quite lengthy queries. And it will look at the first few results for each of those queries, maybe more, and it will start to formulate its answer from that external information. Now, the interesting thing here is that the timeline could be quite quick in terms of you influencing this, right? It's basically just how quickly can the pages that you change get ingested by Google. Obviously, that changes from site to site. In some sites, that's going to be minutes or hours. If you manage to influence a major news publication, in some sites, it might be a bit slower, but this is certainly much quicker than trying to influence underlying training data. In terms of how you do it, there are three things which I've put in what I would say right now a sort of order of effectiveness. I think the big one is Barnacle SEO. So if you think about who's going to be ranking for these queries, it's not necessarily your own site. In fact, it's probably typically not mainly your own site that is ranking. So some of these external authoritative sites that you can influence, maybe with your own presence on them, think about your social profiles, think about Medium, think about LinkedIn, think about Wikipedia, think about YouTube. All of these things that you can influence that you might historically have done to, own a branded SERP or something like this, you would now be doing to try and own some of these non-branded terms and make sure that you control more than just your own result, because Google doesn't care whether it's looking at, or ChatGPT or whatever, doesn't care whether it's looking at the data from your site or someone else's, right? So Barnacle SEO is going to be a big one. Digital PR is also going to be very important in this space to try and influence some of those authoritative third-party sites that you don't directly control. And lastly, of course, your own site, because hopefully you do also rank for these queries. So you've got quite a sort of practical and I would say familiar to SEOs way to influence these responses. And I think this is going to be an important distinction. So when you're thinking about whether it's realistic to try to influence a query, or even when you're thinking about what queries you might like to track in tools like Moz or Stat for your AI visibility tracking, I think you need to bear in mind which of these camps a query is going to be falling in. That's it from me. Yeah, I hope that was useful. Thank you.